Welcome. In this module, we'll cover the basic concepts of variables within ESM. So before we get too far, first let's understand some things about variables. Ultimately, variables are virtual event fields that users define that extend the ArcSight ESM schema based on derived values in order to be used or leveraged within other elements of content such as rules, active channels, notifications. That could be range from operations to pull an element from a string that you want to pull that isn't parsed by default by the connector, or for example, it could be to do an if then else condition in order to do, let's say, for example, business language translation based on a value in order to make an alert be more human friendly before it is sent out to the user. As you can see, there is a number of functions available to leverage within your content. They can range from mathematical elements, reference to the network and asset model, functions around the IP address, lists, active or session that you may have, manipulation in order to extract or create your own strings, timestamps, or even convert types of data from string to numbers in order to perform, cascading operations. These can be chained across from one to the next, referencing each other until such time that you get to the final derived value that you're going to use within your content. So first we'll log into the console and navigate to the field sets resource and open up one of our field sets. In here, you can see there are a number of tabs: attributes, fields, local variables. So local variables, if we click add, we can see that the dialog is opened, and within it, when we open up the drop down for the functions, we can see the list of all the various variables that are available to us within ESM. Great, so now we know where we'll see the dialog for variables within ESM in the CCE when we build content out. As we covered earlier, both local and global variables are derived values that can be leveraged within content. Difference between the two, the key difference between the two, is that local variables are only attached to the parent resource and are only distributed within their parent, whereas global variables are centralized and can be leveraged across multiple pieces of content within ESM. So real quickly, we'll look at the CCE again and see what that means in the GUI for the use of these variables. So let's take a look back into the console and see where we can find some of these dialogues for the variables, both local and global. So first we'll pull up in our resource tree a active channel, and as we can see in this view of the active channel, there is a local variables tab, and that'll be the general position and all the resource types in the list where we can find local variables being an option to be used. As you can see, between the active channel and the rule, it's in the same sub-tab. Now within field sets, likewise, it'll be in the same. However, there's also one additional dialog here, which is that of global variables. Global variables, once they're defined, can comprise of local variables in order to build to the point where you have the global variable that you wish to present and make available to all the additional resources. So now that we've seen the differences between local and global variables in the console, one of the other areas I wanted to stress is around the execution between the two. Local variables, like we said earlier, are accompany the parent resource. For example, a rule, a field set, and can only be leveraged within that particular parent resource. And as such, you would have to define the local variable each time you want to perform that same type of operation over and over. That ultimately uses more resources than for if you were to make that variable a global variable, which can be leveraged across multiple resources. As you can see in the graphic below, that when a rule is created and global variables are evaluated, as it moves through the stack of other content, that event is only needs to do the evaluation once, and as the global variable is leveraged, ESM in and of itself only has to derive that value once. Whereas if it was a local variable, it of course has to perform that operation multiple times to achieve the same result. So there's a matter of efficiency that happens within the content, and ultimately that drives and can impact the overall EPS of your ESM instance. So again, here's a list of resource types where you can take advantage of local variables. It's the same list as before. Uh, and what we'll do next is dig a little bit deeper into the dialogue within the variables, where you can do things such as add, remove, change the execution order, or even promote a local variable to become a global variable. So now that we're back into the CCE, we have a global variable pulled up with the local variables tab ready. And as you can see, there's the options here where we can add, edit, remove, make a local variable global, move it up or down within the execution order. So quite simply, we can click add. We could do, for example, in this case, let's say we'll do an IP address function. We'll parse an IP address. We already have one where we're looking at octet 1. So let's call this one octet 2. We will select the agent address. Sorry, we'll do the attacker address to be consistent with the other one. And we're going to choose the second byte location. So for example, if we had 172.0.15.12 and we were to calculate this, we can see we're getting the 0 as the value. Let's click OK. Oops, sorry. Octet 1, octet 2, click save, and there we have add. Now once we highlight that, then we can of course go ahead and make an edit. One thing you will not be able to change is the name. In order to create a new variable name, you'll have to actually recreate it through the steps again. Again, we could remove it. This one we will remove, and if we wanted to promote this and make it global, that is where we would be able to click this, and at such point it will open the dialog as to where we want to save this global variable within the field set navigation over here for global variables. And in this case, we've just created octet 1 and it is saved there in that location. Great. Now that we've gone through some of the basic dialogues of local variables, we're well underway into getting ready to be able to leverage variables within our content. Excellent. Now that we've got the basics of local and global variables understood, let's move into actually creating a local variable. In this example, we'll go through and create a local variable that is a time drift, which will end up being the time difference in seconds between the manager and agent or device receipt time, any two timestamps. What this does is it measures the time in seconds that you can use to monitor something, for example, your event collection, and if there's some sort of delay in the infrastructure beyond what is the expected for a particular event source or connector, in order to set up some rule sets, the dashboards in order to monitor how the environment is actually behaving. So let's jump over into the console and take a look at those steps. Okay, so now that we're back in the console, let's go to active channels, and we'll create a new active channel. We'll give the active channel a name, which we'll call time drift. Okay, so we have an active channel here being displayed, and now we'll go ahead and we'll start to add in a variable for the time drift. So let's go ahead and open it up so we can edit it. Into the local variables tab, and in here let's add in a time drift local variable. So in it, we'll call it real quick time drift, and just so you can see it, we'll name it LV for local variable. We'll do a time difference. So under the timestamps, we can do time difference, and you can see there's a number of measures. So we'll do it in seconds. And let's say we were to change that to 12, we would expect the number of seconds to be in the order of 10 hours, which is 3,600 or 36,000 seconds. Okay, so in order to select the fields, we'll do the agent receipt time and the manager receipt time. And just so we know this, we'll label it also as agent to manager. We'll click OK, and here's our local variable now that it's been created. Click apply, so it saves, and that's how simple it is to create a local variable. So now that we've created a local variable, let's move over into creating global variables. Global variables are located within the field sets resource underneath the fields and global variables. Under there, we can open the global variable editor and create a global variable. So let's move over into the console once again and go through those steps briefly. So now we're back in our example of the active channel for the local variable that we created. Let's go ahead and actually just go ahead and promote this into a global variable. So what it'll happen is it'll ask us where in the admin fields do we want to create this. We can give it the name. You can see it just takes the name of the existing variable and moves it over into the name of the resource once it gets created. So click OK, and it says there's one there. We'll replace it. So when we come over into our field set, under our fields, we'll see that there's a local variable right here that is set. So if we edit this field, you can see the parameters agent and receipt time. Now there won't be any local variables that are used to build this because they're contained within the parameters section. Now if we were to create this from scratch, what we would end up doing is creating a new global variable. We would give it a new name, and within the parameters we would of course could select in the dialog based on the function that we choose. So if we go back in our timestamp and do difference in seconds again, then we would be able to choose the same values, whether it be the agent receipt time and the manager receipt time, and within that, of course, then we would give it a new name and say OK, and we would see that the global variable is here. So this would effectively equal that. So that's very simply the global variables and the creation of them, and as well as the promotion from a local variable into a global variable. So now that we've actually gone through and created a local variable and a global variable, the last step is to use those variables within some of the piece of content within ESM. So in this example, what we're going to approach is using both variables within a field set and attach it into an active channel. So you can see that the function between the two, while the same, we know on the back end there's some operational differences on how ESM goes about creating those values for us to use, and what does it mean from a reuse and scale standpoint. One of the other elements to understand is that variables in and of themselves, when they're being leveraged in particular with reports and rules, is that there is some translation that can occur. They are referenced using a $ and the variable name. However, in the instance where spaces or periods are used within the variable name, they're either omitted or translated into underscores, as we can see in the list below. So in this last step, let's go over to the console and have a look. Okay, so in this next portion, we'll actually go through how to use a variable. We've seen before how to create local and global variables. There are some nuances. In this example, we'll go through creating an active channel using a field set that is defined by using both a global and a local variable. So in this field set right here, when we open it, you can see I have already created two local variables that are here, with the first being the first octet of the attacker address, with the second actually adding 5 to that value. And it is a field set that contains 3 fields to display. The attacker address will have a global variable, which is the exact same function. So here is the global variable. As we can see, it is the parameters is the octet, which basically takes this same first step in the local variables and applies the second step at the global variable definition in the parameters to achieve the same as the local variable within the field set. So from a dialog standpoint, let's go over to our active channels, and we will see here is a field set with just those 3 values. And if I can display it cleanly on a single screen, you will see that it's the same result coming back from the active channel. The value is operationally going to return the same value, even though it's a local or a global. The difference is that if I try to use that local variable anywhere else and I have to perform this operation somewhere before, like we mentioned, it's only attached to the parent resource. The parent resource in this instance is the field set. So if I was to go and actually look at the field sets and look at this field set definition, you can see I don't have that local variable in here, but if I wanted to add it, it's not, of course, there, but I can always go to the global variable and simply add it like it was a field. Now, in order for me to recreate this, I could go into my local variables, for example, and I could copy the variable and come back to my field set or I could manually recreate it. But in a nutshell, there you have global and local variables. As you can see, the dialog is very similar to adding any other field. So let's get back and kind of recap what all we've covered throughout this module. So now that we've completed a basic overview of variables, we have a good understanding of what's available to us, the dialogues where variables are going to be presented to us within the console, in the various resource types. We understand that local variables, the key being tied to the single parent resource and would have to be manually recreated under each parent in order to achieve the same function, whereas global variables could be created once, managed centrally, and used across multiple resources. Ultimately, local and global variables will get you to the same result as far as the operations and the outcomes that they achieve within the derived values and the custom fields that extend the ESM schema. for you to use within content. And again, the key operational difference between local and global variables is that local, of course, has to generate every time the parent resource is called upon in order to generate the value, whereas global variables are pulled together when the event is processed. Those global variables are essentially created and associated to the event, so that order of execution, those values then can just be retrieved as part of the memory stack associated to the global variable, increasing the efficiencies of the reuse of that variable within the other pieces of content. Thank you, and this concludes the module.